And we are greetings, everyone. My name is Barbara Coverson, and I am the program manager for Family Strengthening Families.
And hello, everyone. I am Joey Ford, the Family Community Outreach Specialist with Family Strengthening Families.
And it is time for our parenting podcast, Parent Talk at Discovery Center. And we have a very special guest with us on today that's going to help us. And I want her to just kind of go ahead, Leslie, tell us a little bit about yourself, about the program. We're going to be talking about advocating as a for your children, on behalf of your children today, what it means to be a good parent advocate. And so Julie is just almost, we heard her on another program and she was so awesome. We asked her to come and join us and share with our parents, our subscribers, on our podcast. So Julie, if you would just go ahead and just give us some opening remarks, tell us a little bit about yourself and the program.
Thank you. As she said, my name is Leslie Junkin, and I am the project director for the Mississippi Parent Training and Information Center. And the Mississippi PTI is what most people identify us. It's not always, most people don't say the Parent Training Center, they just refer to us as MSPTI. So you may have heard that over time. We are Mississippi's Parent Training Center. We are funded through the United States Department of Education. Every state has at least one parent training center. And the Parent Training Center's role is to provide training and information and support and resources to families of children that are suspected of having a disability, have disabilities, or are seeking support for advocating in services, transitioning from school to the community or from the community into some of your residential or adult placement facilities. We can assist with locating those resources. All of our staff have children with disabilities or even have a family member with a disability. So we have all lived the journey as well as supporting other families in our role as staff members of this project. So we cover from birth to 26. So there's no age range that we can't assist a family. We don't always know the answer to every question, but if we don't, we will gladly assist a family in locating that information. We provide virtual training on our website. I know we were talking when they first contacted me about doing this, we talked about our archived webinars. So as a parent, you can go to our website, even professionals, a lot of professionals participate in our trainings to learn how to better communicate with parents, not about how to do their job, but about how to be more engaging, how to get families involved, how to get families to participate, because it's easy from the other side of the table to just kind of focus on the process and not factor in the emotions that are involved with that family. So they're available at any time, just on-demand training. You can view it at any time that you want to. And parents often say, I don't know what questions to ask. Sometimes just listening to that information will generate questions. Listening to me talk about this today, someone may hear it and go, okay, I've got questions about those 4 things that she mentioned. But in a meeting, when they've never been there before, might not know what questions would be relevant to that situation. So you contact our state office. We have a person there. One of our staff members will be answering the phone, just depends on which day of the week. We have an intake form that they fill out, and then we will connect you with one of our parent educators. We have a parent educator in Greenwood. We have one in Hattiesburg. I'm in Northeast Mississippi, I'm in Columbus, very near y'all. And then we have our executive director who's down in McGee, Mississippi in Simpson County. So we kind of cover, as you see over my shoulder, there's a map of our regions back there. So we have someone available to assist families in any of the regions of the state that contact us. And we can attend some IEP meetings in person. It just depends on where you are and is someone available that day. We can do virtual, we can participate virtually. Through COVID, we did learn that we can support a lot of families virtually. They don't always need you at the table, but they need your ears at the table. So we learned that we were able to do that just to support them, but it gives you that extra set of ears, an extra person to take notes, and just some emotional support for a lot of parents. Then we can participate via phone if necessary. But parents contact the office. Depending on where you are in the process will determine how we help you. If you're trying to get an evaluation, there's different information. If you've had it, now you're meeting to discuss it, there's different information. You know, it just kind of goes through that process. And we have books, we have toolkits of information that we can mail out to families. We have tip sheets. There's no limit really to what types of resources we will assist a family in locating. If we can't find it, we'll go and look for it. But sometimes it's just having the emotional support. Knowing that you're speaking with another family who has been through the same process makes a lot of difference.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I think a lot of things that you know, as a parent, you may not know that's
Mhm.
available for your child or what the child can be provided.
Right.
Just not knowing that sometimes. And so it's good to have someone who kind of stays up to date on those things to
Mhm.
help our parents along the way. So Joy, you want to ask the first question? I'll jump in and I'll get started. Then. Let's see.
Well, you've given us a good bit already about the advocate part and
Right.
who's the parent advocate and things such as that. Thank you for that, because that was
Mhm,
definitely going to be a question that I was going to
mhm,
ask.
mhm.
One of our most asked questions anyway. What are some skills that a parent needs to be an effective advocate, and how would they use those skills?
I'll start from my perspective as a mom. I have a 23-year-old daughter that has Down syndrome. So when I had her, I was starting, you know, kind of like this. I was starting blind essentially. I had no knowledge of special education whatsoever. So for me, it was about how did I learn what I needed to do. The first lesson I had to learn was how to communicate through my emotion because I was upset, I was afraid, angry, bitter. You know, you go through that same cycle of grief
Mhm,
with that diagnosis that you do with anything else.
mhm,
That's not what you thought you would have. That's not what you expected to deal with. So
mhm,
it's really hard to come past that and allow the people who are there to help you to assist you because you may want things, you know, I always said, I want everything that's available. But as she got older and I learned everything that was available wasn't always best for her. But
mhm,
I also had to learn that there was a process to getting whatever it was that we needed. So it's learning how to communicate without letting your anger, your emotion, your sadness, your frustration. It's really difficult to leave that at the door as the parent. And if you don't have someone there to support you that understands those emotions, that makes a big difference as well. Once you can get to that stage, it's learning about the process. How do you get that information to educate yourself? And every parent, you know, we always say you meet parents where they're at. Every parent doesn't start with a foundation of I've got this tremendous support system. Every parent doesn't have that. You may have young families, you may have single moms, you may have single dads, you may have grandparents raising children, and they don't know how to connect with the resources. So I think figuring out where the resources are first would be the best place to start. Once you've found those resources, figure out how do you prepare for a meeting? What do we need to know? But also learn to document everything. If you ask a question, if they call your office and say, okay, here's my situation, what do I need to do? And you tell them, here's 3 things that you need to do. Write those 3 things down. Because when it comes to helping you or you contact our office, we're going to ask, have you done this? Have you done A, B, C, D, E, all those things that we know have to be done. But typically parents don't know they need to keep up with that documentation. So they can't always tell you, well, I talked to someone at the school. Well, who was it? Was it a teacher? Someone who had the ability or the authority to make decisions and answer your questions. So sometimes that creates a delay in getting evaluations and in getting services because you may be asking the wrong person, or is it required that you ask for that in writing? So you have to learn how to request what you need, how to document what you need. And then communication, you know, we all know how we communicate determines, I think, the tone of every conversation, but I think our ability to communicate kind of drives the outcome sometimes too.
Mhm,
mhm,
And if you don't have great communication skills or you're not being communicated with in a parent friendly way,
Right.
That makes a really significant impact. There's a lot of big language in the school system, especially when it comes to special education services. Any types of evaluations, there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of big words. And most of the time, all you hear is special education. And a lot of parents stop there. So I think learning how to communicate and learning where to find the resources would give you the best start, because those resources can then kind of help teach you what the next step should be.
Okay.
So what do you do if the child has an IEP, an individualized educational plan, and it's not working? You know, the parent, you know, at some point realizes what we have in place is not working. What do they do?
If you called my office today and said, my child's IEP, we had an IEP meeting in the spring and we wrote goals and now we're in school and we're just not making progress, what do I do? My first questions are going to be, do you have a copy of that IEP? And do you have a copy of your child's last assessment, that last evaluation? Because that will help us make sure we're providing the appropriate answers and the appropriate support. But what happens is parents quite often don't have a copy of that document. And if you don't know what's in the document and I say, how is it not being followed? Sometimes the answer is, I don't know. So I think in order for parents to make sure that the IEP is implemented appropriately, they have to learn how to read it. And that's something that we can assist them with. That's part of that role in, you know, advocating for your child, is learning what your role is in that process. The schools are supposed to educate our children, but they're not required to educate the parents. The parents have to access those resources on their own. And so if the IEP is not working, we would need to call an IEP meeting and sit down with that IEP committee and say, here are the things that I'm concerned about. Find out what are they doing to help the child meet those goals. And if the child isn't meeting those goals, are there other steps that we could take? Are there other things that we could do? Or do we need to modify or change or maybe even create a new goal to find out why the child isn't making progress?
Okay. Yeah. So when they request that meeting, and does that meeting need to be in writing, or can they just verbally request it? And how long from the time of the request do the school have to respond to have a meeting?
You can verbally request, but my advice will always be request in writing. Just make it best practice as a parent to request things in writing and keep a copy. There isn't anything in the law that says if I request a meeting on the 1st, it must be held by the 15th, but it should be held in a reasonable amount of time. Now, everyone's interpretation of reasonable can be different, but it's okay for the parent to say, we have a problem. I'm concerned about Leslie's progress in her reading class. Can we meet by the 12th or the 14th? It's okay to put those times there and make sure that it doesn't go, because if you only ask the teacher, a parent might say to me, I've asked for an IEP meeting for the entire semester. Who did you ask? Well, I mentioned it to the teacher when we went to, parent night, but did you follow up? There's a huge burden of responsibility on the parent in this. The schools are required to provide services, but the parent has that burden of making sure they're requesting them from the appropriate person. And also, who is the appropriate person to request that meeting from? The school secretary can't schedule that for you. You need to speak with the teacher. But I also say it's important, if you have a child with a disability in the public schools that has an IEP, at the beginning of the school year, you need a piece of paper somewhere that has the names of every person that will provide services or instruction to your child during that school year and how to contact them. Phone number, email, whatever their preferred method of contact is. And then when you have a request or you have a question, send it to everybody. It's just a system of checks and balances, But I think too, sometimes teachers forget that every parent might not have access to a computer. They might not have access to a printer to print things out. They might only have a phone with a limited amount of data. And we all want, we all talk about equity in education. Equity includes access for families as well. And if you're only using Schoology, I don't know what system Starkville uses for parent communication. My local district uses Schoology. parents who say, I don't even know how to access that. And that's where all the assignments are. That's where you're supposed to post the questions and get the information. So we have to make sure that parents also have access to the supports and the information that they need as well.
Yes.
So I know we've been using this word IEP, and
Mhm.
and so can you kind of just what is an IEP? Kind of like what is just in case there is a parent that like I was at one point that was in denial about um the capabilities of my child,
Mhm, mhm.
and how an IEP might be able to help that.
Um, I think first we need to look at historically, we see special education as a place on the backside of campus that no one knew about.
Mhm.
And it's really important to educate parents, professionals, anyone involved in education needs to be aware special education is a service, it's not a place. But we still think of it. Typically, you think special education, what's your immediate thought? A self-contained classroom. That's usually the first thing that comes to mind.
Right.
You think of, we've still got kids using terminology about the buses and different things like that. So we have to kind of shift that as well. But if your child has a disability, you've been evaluated, you were found eligible for those services, and they say, okay, your child is eligible, we need to write the IEP. That individualized education plan is just that, an individual plan for how they're going to educate that child. It will have, where are we currently? Where do we need to go? How great are the deficits? And what goals and objectives are we going to use to try and bring that child as close to grade level as possible, or to allow them to maximize their abilities to the greatest extent possible? Just depends on what the diagnosis or the eligibility category is. Is it a child with a health impairment, asthma, sickle cell, diabetes, ADHD? Is it a child with an orthopedic impairment who may have who uses a wheelchair? Or is it a child on the autism spectrum, or a child with an intellectual disability? All of that drives how that IEP is written. So we always say, just look at it as a contract between the parent and the school.
Okay.
It says, here's your child, here's the description. You look at the front page and it should tell you about your child. When you read it, you should go, okay, that sounds like my son or daughter. If it doesn't, then maybe we need to talk about, what can we do to make sure it accurately reflects that child.
Okay. And I do know, I think I heard you earlier say that depends on the day and the time of the IEP that you may be able to go with a parent or assist them in some kind of way at the IEP meeting. But if I'm trying to see how to ask this question, sometimes if I don't agree with what they've come up with,
Mhm.
what do I do as a parent?
If you don't agree with what they've come up with, one, I always say, bring in someone to help you before the disagreement gets too big to
Mhm.
resolve.
Mhm.
But another thing that I want to make sure that every parent knows, and that y'all know this as well, if any parent asks you, if your child has an IEP, in the state of Mississippi, the parents can record their IEP meetings with 24 hours notice.
Oh,
There were a lot of people who fought really hard to get that law passed in our state. When you're a parent and you're at the table, how many IEP meetings, if y'all been to IEP meetings, you walk in the room and I always say it's like going before a grand jury. You feel like you're in the witness box across the table by yourself,
Mhm.
and there's everyone else across the table waiting for you. That in itself is so intimidating and so overwhelming to families.
Mhm.
We always try to go into the meeting with a parent. We don't go in beforehand, but it's really important that a parent knows you can take someone with you.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter who it is.
Mhm.
You don't have to have permission to bring someone to that meeting with you. And if you're bringing an attorney, the district has to be notified. But if you're bringing your mother, your sister, your church member, your neighbor, whoever it is, you have every right to bring emotional support. But I also encourage parents, have an agenda. Sit down before that meeting with whoever it is that you go to for support and say, okay, here's what I want to talk about. Write those things down, and whoever that support person is, let it be their job to take notes for you and to make sure you address those things. But record that meeting, not because there's a problem, but because you have that right.
Mhm.
That is just the essence of that. I don't have to justify why I want to record that meeting. My husband may be working, my spouse, my partner may be working, my family member, my neighbor who's a retired school teacher might not be available that day, and I want her to listen to my recording. Or I just want to listen to it in my car so I can say, did they really say that? Or did I miss, did they answer that question? Did I ask that because I can't remember? You can do whatever you choose to with that recording when it's over with. But use that, exercise the right that you have, because that is a right solely to support parents. You can use your cell phone, you can use an old tablet, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
That allows you, it's almost like a third set of ears at the table and no one else in the room has to move.
Right.
It changes the tone of the meeting. It changes typically. I know many parents have said, I feel like I can sit up a little straighter and I'm not so afraid because I know there's proof of our conversation, especially when you're having problems and you're not agreeing with what's being provided. Now you meet and you can't resolve that. If you have a child with an IEP, there are dispute resolution processes in place by our State Department of Education. You have the right to file a formal state complaint at any time. You have the right to request mediation. Mediation has to be agreed on by both parties, the parent and the school district. And you also have a right to go to due process. Due process is not free for families. Complaints and mediation are. So if a parent decides to go to due process, they will have to secure an attorney. So we're not allowed to represent parents because we don't have attorneys on staff in our office. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of attorneys with specialized knowledge around special education. So we try our best to help parents resolve those disputes before they have to go to due process, because that can be a long process and the child is just sitting there the entire time. But working out those problems, I always say, before you get so angry that you can't take back the conversation, reach out to someone for help. And we can say, okay, let's go through the document. Tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what you've done. Let me see, let us look at the law and say, are they violating a law? Or is it that maybe these goals need to change? There are a lot of pieces to that puzzle before you throw it back in the box and start over. So there are many options to help a family with some dispute resolution.
Okay.
Joy, you have another one?
Well, I was gonna ask, who else should the parent expect to be in the meeting other than themselves or their support person or advocate?
I'll read you the list.
Okay.
In most any IEP meeting, there's going to be the parent, a general education teacher, a special education teacher. If they are receiving therapy services of any sort, that person should be there. If they receive counseling services, or say there are mental health services that were brought into the school, like through your wraparound meetings, your community counseling, things like that, that person can be in the meetings if their presence is requested. You're going to have typically a principal. If you're looking at evaluations, the person who did the evaluation has to be there to interpret those results for the family. And then if you request, your special education director can be there. You have to have someone in that school district who is authorized to commit agency resources at that meeting. Now, the district can designate, like the principal can be the agency rep for the day. But if there's something that a service or something that's agreed to in the meeting, someone there has to be able to say, yes, we can provide that. If you have a meeting and it's just you and a teacher, that's not an IEP meeting. If it's just you and the principal, that is not an IEP meeting. So I think a lot of it comes from parents being able to find that foundational knowledge. Here's what that document will look like. This page is about this. This information means that. Here's all the people that should be there. That, I think, just starts you in a good place, because you know who all the players are. It's like playing a game of spades and you don't know who's going to be there. Every time you go to the restroom and come back, somebody different's got a hand of cards. You need to know who all those people are so that the parents have that expectation of, for me, that professionalism, but also following the process as well.
Right.
Yeah, I know there were so again, like my son was a special needs child, so I was just kind of reflecting back on, there were times when we would have an IEP meeting and maybe say the therapist wasn't there or couldn't be there, whatever. And they would say, we'll just give it to them and have them to sign it and whatever. And I think there was probably a time or two that I did go along with that because he was kind of getting into a little bit of maintenance mode. You know, it wasn't anything like just blatantly going on wrong. And but there were times when, just this is, everybody needs to be present so we can come up with something.
Yes.
And so I, I'm like, everybody's not here. And so that kind of, I think, sometimes they don't really want to hear that, because can you just do what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
I still had to advocate for my son.
Right. But also advocating for your rights to be respected in that process. I think that takes away some of the integrity of the process because, okay, if the speech therapist, if you had a meeting at the beginning of the year and you've written your speech goals and you're okay with that, and this is a mid-semester meeting and you have no problems with speech services, your kid's making progress, you're not worried about that, then you can say, she doesn't have to be here today. The people who are here to address this problem need to be here. But what the law says, without your written consent to excuse them from the meeting, they should be in the meeting. Now, we've learned again through COVID, they can virtually be in that meeting. And where I see that happen the most is a lot of school districts, in years past, they had a speech therapist and occupational therapist who worked for the district.
Yes.
Now they contract out. Like I know you've got a kids therapy spot there in Starkville. They'll contract with them. So that one person may be moving to every campus that you have in the district. And it might be difficult to schedule them, but it doesn't mean they can't submit you a written report of progress, nor does it mean they can't call in. And if it's an 11 o'clock meeting and they have an 11:15 student to work with, ask you ahead of time, Mom, can she go first so that she can go on and meet with the student that she has next? It's for me, it's just a respect issue. Another thing, if you have a child that has an IEP and you get a note home this afternoon, says we have a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning and you must be there, you don't have to go. That to me, I always say, if you called the school today and said, we have to meet at 9 o'clock in the morning, I always chuckle and say that response would be, who does she think she is? She can't demand that we all come together that way. And that's not to say anything negative about the school system, but it's bringing that group together on that short notice. But yet that group won't hesitate to have the expectation that that parent can appear on such short notice. So, the law is written to say that the meeting should be held at a mutually agreed upon time and place. If you can't be there at 9 in the morning, here's my call. I'm sorry, but I can't make it. Here are 3 other times and 2 other dates that I can come. Let's see if we can make one of those work. If you're missing work, you're losing money. That creates financial hardships at your house. Do you have a babysitter for another child? Do you have a sick child at home that day and you can't go? Did you have a doctor's appointment you've been waiting on for 6 months? It's just about respecting everyone at the same level. Even though we don't all have the same role in that process, we all have a right to be treated equally when we sit at that table, because you are part of that team. And unfortunately, very few parents feel like they're part of that team. And that's something that I hope before I get old enough to not have to work anymore and can sit on my porch and drink coffee all day, that parents will say, I feel like I'm an equal member of that team when I sit at the table.
Joy, I have one other question, and then Joy, you can finish. Sometimes I think we had a parent not too long ago, but anyway, maybe the child has had some behavioral issues, and maybe has done something, violated a school policy or whatever. And so, and then they may want to try to move them to alternative school or something like that, but the child has an IEP. What does that process look like? can they just move them from school to alternative school?
That's a hot air balloon full of information there.
Oh,
There's just so many different variables in that situation. Is it one of your core issues, weapons, drugs, or violence? It doesn't matter if you have an IEP or not, you're going to alternative school.
mhm,
That's just, there's no exemption for those core violations.
mhm.
Now, my question would be, if you have an IEP, and I think I told y'all when we talked earlier, I hesitate to say behavior problems because we all have behavior and it's a means of communicating, be it out of frustration or be it out of an inability to tell you anything else.
Mhm.
If you have a child with an IEP and they say, well, you have to go to alternative school because 3 days in a row you tried to poke your neighbor with a pencil. Have they done a functional behavior assessment on that child? Does the child have a behavior intervention plan? Do we have data to support that it's been appropriately implemented over a period of time that's long enough for the child to learn the desired behavior? That's where we need to find those. That's where the questions start coming. You know, we have to have those questions to find out, has everything that's available and everything that should be done been done prior to that change in placement being decided on for that child. It's not just, well, this is too much trouble in the classroom, we're sending you to alternative school. No, it's not that easy, but unfortunately we do see it happen that way, especially when parents don't know where to find resources around behavior. And there's some new guidance. I'll send you both a copy of it. We're still kind of trying to digest it ourselves. The U.S. Department of Education released it in July of this year around procedures and discipline for children with disabilities in our public schools. So we potentially are looking for some changes to happen, but it's so new right now. Everyone's still trying to figure that out. Like, just for instance, say you've got a child and mom says, they call me every day from work to come and pick him up. Got to go at 9 today, 10 tomorrow, 8:15 the next day. And they say, well, let's just stay home for a couple of days to kind of reset and come back. Each of those days is a change in placement because they are removed from their educational environment. And for every day they're removed, they're losing instructional time. They're losing time in the classroom to learn the desired behaviors. So it's just, that's why I said it's a hot air balloon full of things there. The key for me is always, do we know the cause of the behavior? What's the child's eligibility and what has been done to try and prevent where we are? But have any interventions been put in place via a behavior assessment or a plan? And what's the documentation say? Here's how we've implemented. Like, you don't want to see a goal that says Leslie will sit quietly 50% of the day. What does that look like?
Yeah.
She will respond appropriately with the appropriate behavior 60% of the time. What's an appropriate response? And again, what is the appropriate behavior? All three of us would probably define appropriate differently. So it needs to be very concrete in the goals that we're addressing. So like I said, that's like trying to make a pie and you've only got 3 of the ingredients. It's not going to come out well. You're going to have to start and stop and start and stop. And behaviors like that, you don't know. Is it because I can't tell you what's wrong? Is it because I don't understand how to say what's wrong? Or is it because I don't know how to manage my own behavior well enough to not do what it is that I'm doing that you need me to stop doing? So that's like floating down the river on a raft then you're trying to catch boards to make it bigger and then one falls off because we just don't have all the tools we need to answer those questions. And that's probably one of the areas where parents need the greatest amount of information and support too.
Yeah. All right, Joy, do you have anything else?
I don't have anything else. I think you've given us a lot of information. Well, I would ask this, because you mentioned assessment. Where would you begin in case a parent asks, where would I start with that, getting that assessment?
If a parent says they think their child may have a disability, let's talk with the teacher first and say, I think, or I would like to talk to principal, teacher about a possible evaluation to see if my child might be eligible for special education. And again, make that request in writing. And One thing that we have on our website, and I'll also send y'all a link to this, we have a book. It's called It's Still a Good Idea in Mississippi. And the idea is that acronym for IDEA, which is your Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And it's a guide for parents written by advocates in our state in parent-friendly language on how the special education process should work. You can download it from our website. You can view it on the website. It's compatible with mobile phone viewing, but if that's a problem, we can print a copy and send to a family. We have it on some flash drives, like if y'all wanted some flash drives in your office to be able to print certain pages. In that book are sample letters that help parents how to request to view your child's educational records. Say you have a child who doesn't have any academic issues, but has behavioral challenges that are significant, that have caused placement in alternative settings, and they want to look at the records and see what it says. There's a form letter in there to help you request that. There's a form letter on requesting evaluations, IEP meetings. I think there's 9 or 10 in there. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but I can send y'all a copy of that so that you would have those. And it's just where the parent just puts their information in those blanks if they want to use that exact form. But if not, it gives you the language. It tells you, here's the thing, here's how you need to say, you know, I want Leslie tested to see if she can get special ed. Why do you want Leslie tested? She's struggling with reading. She's struggling with math. She doesn't seem to be able to keep up, or she really seems to not make friends well. I think she's struggling socially, or she has a lot of anxiety. Give them more than just, I want this done. Tell me why you want this done. Once you submit that request, they're going to share it with what they call your MET team, which is a multidisciplinary assessment team. It's just that team of people at the school who review these requests. They'll look at it and say, okay, based on the grades, all the documentation, all the data that we have, we do or don't think Leslie needs an evaluation. They have to do that within 14 days. And at the end of that, they'll give you a letter that says, yes, we will, or no, we don't think there's enough data to support it. And then you have, if they say yes, they're going to get parent consent, written consent to do those evaluations. Then they have 60 days for those to be completed. If it's the initial, if it's the first time they've ever been evaluated, there's 60 days. Once that 60 days is over, if it's determined the child is eligible, then you'll have that meeting and you'll write the IEP. If it's determined that there's not enough data, but they think Leslie's struggling, then she can be referred to the tier process. So I'm sure, and that's probably another day's conversation there, but you have, you know, tier 1 is everybody, and then you have tier 2 and tier 3. What we don't want to see is a child who's in tier 2 for some targeted interventions. You give them that for 6 weeks. Oh, their grades are fine. They don't need this anymore. So they go back to tier 1. Then when they lose that support, their grades drop again. Well, let's move you back to tier 2. And then you go back to tier 1. Or you move to tier 3 and that really intense intervention helps you. Well, you don't need this anymore, so we'll take you back to tier 1. One thing to know is that just because your child is in the tier process does not mean they cannot be evaluated for special education. That's not a reason to deny an evaluation, because if they've been there in the tier 2 or 3 for 2 school years, there's obviously something going on that would warrant discussion about an evaluation happening. So
well, I think, Leslie, you know, we are part of a school district and we have some really great teachers. I know that's a part of our school district. And for the most part, they really want to see their students succeed. And so I think that's one of the things that we try to do here at Discovery Center is try to encourage parents that together we can all work together for the benefit of helping our children, our students, our families, and have a more successful outcome. So I don't want anyone to leave thinking, you know, we're just beating up on teachers or beating up on parents. What we're trying to do with this podcast is to, you know, say that we can work together and that there are things in place that we can help each other so that the students can get help. You know, when we do our parenting classes, we always say, that little 3-year-old is not going to stay 3. One kid is going to be 13 and then he'll be 30. You know, so what are we doing to make sure that we're producing adults that will have the opportunity to really kind of thrive in society. And so that's going to require all of us working together, parents, teachers, community, everyone working together. And Leslie, there was a quote I saw that you had, and by Helen Keller, and I just got to read this quote because it just kind of stuck with me that you sent us. It says, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." And that was a quote by Helen Keller, and I just thought that was awesome. It helped me today.
It does. And what you were saying about the schools, I always tell people we have excellent school districts. We have fabulous teachers, but there's a system that they have to follow. So that frustration, it ends up seeming as if it's directed to that person, but that person is part of the system, and we can't, I always tell, I was in a meeting earlier today and I said, we have to remember this is not personal. This is about the child whose name is on the paper. That's whose future we are planning. And I always want parents to remember and teachers to remember, when you sit down at the table that day for that meeting with that parent, that may be your job, but that child on that piece of paper is that parent's entire world. Every parent wants what's best for their child. They might not know how to pursue getting it. And that's where I think the system breaks down, is how do we support those parents in that process? I have friends, I have a staff member who has a child in the Starkville school system who absolutely thinks that it is, and I agree with her, the system that at the partnership school, fabulous things that they're doing over there. They've provided such amazing supports and been willing to work with this family, but there are situations that aren't always good, and that's the reality of it. But it doesn't mean that every basket full of apples is going to have a bad one in the bottom. It just means that sometimes we will have challenges and we have to deal with those. But I think the more parents know, more access to resources they have, the more empowered they feel, and the greater their ability to communicate what their needs are will be. So I think as professionals, we can share those resources very willingly. Me coming to the table with a parent at a meeting in your district doesn't mean that I'm there to be the bad guy. I'm there to support that parent so that when we leave, the mom can say to me, I understand so much better now what's supposed to happen, how it should happen, and what my role is in that meeting. That's probably 60 to 75% of what we do, is just teaching parents how to be part of that process.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Leslie, for being with us today. Is there anything else that we maybe didn't cover that you would like to share? Any final comments or anything before we end today?
We could talk for 10 years and never.
Oh, wow.
I will say though, any parent that y'all have our contact information, I'll send you some additional brochures and things to have on hand. Any parent that needs assistance, it's just simply making that phone call to our office. If you're on social media, we have a very active Facebook page. We post all of our trainings, every conference that's available. I do have a parent advisory council, and I shamelessly look for parents constantly who want to serve on my council. But they can call the office, ask to speak with me. They'll get you in touch with me. And if we can provide resources, anything that we can do, we can find an answer to a question, or we have information we can mail out to parents as well. We can do virtual consultations with parents if you just want to talk with us before you go to a meeting. Anything that is possibly anything that we can coordinate to make it work to support a family. We can do it via phone, we can do it via Zoom, we can do it FaceTime, however it needs to happen. But if a parent has questions, please call. Don't think you have to do this by yourself, and don't leave that meeting thinking I'll never learn this, because there are ways to teach you.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much again, Leslie, for sharing and just imparting to our families today all this wealth of information. Again, I think our office number is 662-615-0033. If anyone that's listening or viewing this needs to contact us, and we'll be happy to share the information that we have with you so that you can advocate for your children successfully. It's been a great day. And we thank you again, Leslie, for sharing and being with us. And until the next time, everybody, have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.